All right. Welcome, everyone. We are super excited to be here today for our first live episode of the KindlED Podcast. Welcome, welcome. We are super excited to be interviewing Kelly Smith, founder of Prenda and author of the book A Fire to be Kindled, which releases today on Amazon. We are so excited about it.
Thanks, Kaity. It's great to be here.
Kelly, welcome to the KindlED Podcast.
Awesome. So, Kelly, we would love to know your story and what inspired you to write a book about empowering learners. How did you
that goes
get
back
to
a
this
long
place?
way, Adriane. I guess we could pick it up in circa kind of 2013, where I had found myself volunteering, starting a code club at the library. So this is all in the book, but it's basically the story where I felt like kids should learn computer programming, and there weren't a lot of options for them to pick that up. So I said, instead of just doing it, me and my own son at home, let's do it at the library and invite the neighborhood. It turned into this learning laboratory for me. I was there every week for 5 years. I got to work with thousands of kids personally, and then we helped other public libraries around the country start their own code clubs. So I got to be this, kind of scientist in a way, or at least front row seat to lots of kids grappling with what it means to learn. What was interesting about this program was it was all after school, voluntary at the library. Nobody had to be there. The subject matter was difficult. There's a lot of cognitive burden in learning to code, but it was also very engaging and creative and social. And this environment that sort of emerged over those years became this source of questions for me. I saw kids who were struggling in a traditional academic setting or school, and those same kids would come to life, create awesome stuff, learn things that were hard. And watching that, I thought, there's something in this. There's something deeper. It's not just about, JavaScript or HTML. This is about how to be in the world as a learner. And then that led me on this pursuit, which ultimately had me in my house around my kitchen table with 7 kids and called it a micro school in 2013 or 2018. It was 5 years ago. And ever since, it's been the mission really is to empower learners by creating these environments where kids can really take ownership and learn in ways that are exciting and engaging and fun.
And I love when I was starting to look into joining Prenda, I was listening to some podcasts and things that you were on. And the story that really stuck with me was the kid who said, I'm dumb, or I'm not smart, or I hate school. And then you're like, but you're doing trigonometry and doing coding. And I just found that to be so fascinating. It's like, okay, there's, like you said, there's something here. Why does this child not like being in the school setting, or think this child, think that he is not smart, but yet he's doing some really cognitively intense things?
Yeah, I mean, humans are born storytellers, right? And sometimes that works in our favor, and sometimes it works against us. In the process of kind of trying to elevate this idea of what it means to be a learner in the world, I talk to a lot of people about this, and some of them are really successful by any measure. They've run businesses and held important positions and shaped policy, and they've made money and done all these things that you would look to and say, okay, that's a successful person in the world. But even those people, as I talk to them about school and learning and take them back in time, many of them struggled. Many of them picked up storylines that even as adults, much, much later, they still believe around their ability to do math or what they're like as a student. Or, it's crazy to me to think that those stories grip us so powerfully. And kids as young as 5 years old and maybe even earlier are grabbing onto a narrative about themselves and the world that often is a very limiting narrative, and it's getting in their way. So much of what I get excited about is trying to blast through those narratives and open people's eyes up to what real learning is and what's possible. And we can talk more about what that means, but that's the goal here.
Yeah, so I'm interested in the title. So it comes from a Plutarch quote, and you can tell us about that quote, but also Why Plutarch? Plutarch seems like so old and
Yeah, it's
stuffy.
a
Like, how
quote
is
that
this
has
still
just
relevant?
hit me hard from the very beginning when I encountered it, which was years ago, and continues to just really shape the way I think about education. So Plutarch, 1,000+ years ago, was a Greek who then got Roman citizenship. He's an ancient philosopher. This is a time in the history of humanity where some people were engaging in real dialogue, right? They were trying to understand things, and Plutarch has a book about lectures and about just the learning process. And he says in one of his books, or one of his comments, the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled. We talk about in the first chapter of the book, really breaking that down in two metaphors. If you picture a vessel like a cup and you're filling it up with water, that's one metaphor for learning, and you could think of a human brain that way. And the other metaphor is a fire to be kindled. And Plutarch's saying that's how we should think about it. If you've ever done the process of starting a fire from scratch, you get all this dry stuff, and it's got to be small, and it's got to be arranged just so, and you need the air flow to be appropriate and enough sparks to catch and the heat to transfer in this moment of ignition. And when you finally get that fire, it feels like a miracle. It's just this incredibly special time. And I think many of us listening, hopefully you've had this experience camping or something where you've tried to start a fire without matches, without a push button. That's an amazing thing. And then if you compare those metaphors and say, my goal is actually to start a fire, but I'm treating it as if it was a vessel to be filled. I'm walking around pouring water. That's the wrong thing to do, obviously, right? Like, that's not going to lead to starting fires. And that's what so many people experience in a system that really is about getting all of the knowledge into the heads of the kids. And you can see, why those design choices were made. But I believe we're at a moment in time where, let's get back to a fire to be kindled and invite every single human being, young or old, to think of their brains this way and find what ignites the fire for them.
I love that. And it's so funny because, like you pointed out, so many of the traditional way we think about learning is actually making lighting that fire harder, right? It's like pouring water on something's the opposite of starting a fire, right? And it takes time for that kindling to dry out and to be prepared to be ignited, right? Is that kind of track with what you saw working with all of those kids in Code Club before you started Prenda?
Yeah, there's certainly some amount of undoing that needs to be done, right? If I remember this kid, and I can't remember if I talk about this in the book, but this kind of shy, I was probably 8 years old, and he was hiding behind his mom a little bit, and we got him set up, and he's looking around. And Code Club was an alive place. You can imagine walking into this room at the library. There's kids on laptops and meeting with other kids, and there's lots of social interaction, and it gets a little loud, and there's creativity, and everybody's doing something different, and it can feel chaotic and weird, especially if you've never been in an environment like that. This little boy just kind of looked around. I could see him sort of doing it, but he sat there with his computer on his desk, kind of waiting the first time he came, just waiting for something to happen to him, right? And that was what he had been conditioned to believe. He's kind of looking to the adults to sort of tell him how to, how learning happens, what's the next step. And it took me a while, because I was busy helping the other kids, to notice that this is what was going on. So he had been there for, I don't know, 10 minutes, just kind of sitting there waiting. But eventually I realized he's waiting for some sort of, permission or something to happen. And I buddied him up with one of the other kids that's been there a while. He introduced him to the way this works, quickly making friends. By, 3 weeks in, he's coming back again and again. And he's one of these kids that's helping others and, opening up their project and taking it in their own direction. It's fire. And that was something that was really exciting to see firsthand over and over again as I worked with kids at the library on coding. But I've seen it now in the context of math and science and social studies, English, and all of the subjects. It's not really about what you're learning. It's about how you're learning, and it's about yourself as a learner.
Yeah, I noticed that with my 6-year-old, we had him in traditional environment for a few months to see if it would be a good environment for him. And he emotional meltdowns at home, and it was not the right environment for him. So we put him in a Montessori, and he came home the first week and he's like, I don't know what to do. No one's telling me what to do. And he's like, I don't like this. This is not fun. And then slowly, as he kept going to school, he realized, oh, I get to choose what I want to learn. And that's how he learns anyway. So it's amazing. Just in 3 months, he already was being, what's the word?
Programmed. Yeah.
Changed to think, oh, learning's happening to me. Programmed. There you go. There's the word. I could not think of it. Programmed to wait for an adult to tell him what to do. And then now in this environment, he's back to his roots of just this natural learner, and he's so imaginative and creative, and he doesn't have meltdowns anymore at home, which is awesome. Extra bonus. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about the Wright brothers. You talk about them in your book and the qualities
I'm glad
of
you
an
asked.
empowered
Thank you for bringing up one of my favorite examples of what it means to be a learner. I mean, I think Orville and Wilbur Wright, who lived 120 years ago, they did the first powered flight of humans in a craft of their own making. In fact, you can kind of see it in the background. It's got a little bit of a glare on it, but this is a photo from 1903, December, where that plane is barely off the ground. You can't really tell. It's maybe like, less than 2 feet off the ground. Wilbur Wright's running alongside, he had been stabilizing the wing of it. There's a little track that they had built so they could get it moving quick enough. But it was 6, 8, 7, 8 miles an hour. I mean, it was not moving fast. It was, this is a moment in the history, like an inflection point in the history of mankind, right? Now we can fly, we can go places. We've gone now to other planets. We go to the moon. Like, this all started with this one moment 120 years ago. And that's not that long ago, where you've got a guy laying down on his face with a little motor that they had kind of scrapped together and some wood. These things were breaking all the time. They got hurt over and over again. It was just this example of what it means to actually be a learner. And I think part of what I say in the book is we look at a story like that and we think of it as some sort of other, right? This hero that's outside of me or anyone I know. Like, that was Orville Wright, that was Wilbur Wright. And the point is, it's not that impressive when you look close at it and drill into it. And that should give you confidence. Like, you can be a learner also. I know this sounds crazy, but there are children around us, like everywhere in our lives, that are capable of doing things just as significant as, the first powered flight. And we need it. Like, humanity needs these things. I know that sounds again, I can kind of hear your reaction to this. Like, oh yeah, come on. Like, maybe I just want them to get through college and then get a job. And it's like, yeah, that, like, those are fine goals, but like, they're capable of whatever they want to do. And that's needed. But that's the difference between, I think what many of us think of as learner, which is really a passive thing. You sort of go through the motions and get the grades and the transcripts, and you move your way through a system that kind of happens to you. The difference between that and what the Wright brothers did, which was all about empowered learning. There's a lot more I could say about that, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. And but can you go through like the actual qualities? Like in your book, you write like intentional, incremental. Like, where did you get those?
Just studying the story, and there's a great biography. I believe it's David McCullough that did it, about the Wright brothers. I'm going to have that wrong. I should look around here somewhere, but in this biography, you learn all these things. So I think people would know. Okay, Orville and Wilbur Wright. You've heard of that. You've heard of the first airplane. I think maybe Kaity Hawk, North Carolina, like that's where they did this work. But the Wright brothers were from Ohio. It took them 700 mile train rides every year to get to Kaity Hawk. They had been going. So the first word I say is learning is intentional, right? And what they did was they looked at maps and data about where the wind was strong. They said Kaity Hawk, North Carolina, and the Outer Banks, like that's a place where the wind is great. In fact, even today, people that like to do recreational activities, kiting and some of these other things, will go all the way to North Carolina to just be there and experience the great winds on the sandy beaches of the Outer Banks. And that's what they did. There was nobody around. It wasn't like they were in the middle of, some sort of population center. There wasn't an audience. They weren't famous. Another thing I'd point out is that it's incremental. every single glider ride. And as I mentioned, they had been going for years before that, flying these gliders without engines, one after another. And they would get these rides that were pretty good, and they'd figure out how the wings should work, and over again, jumping off of sand hills basically, and sometimes crashing and sometimes gliding peacefully to the ground. I point out that they're innovative. A couple things happened, right? One was they didn't have a motor like the existing engines of the time. And remember, this is turn of the century, early 1900s. So there were motors, there were internal combustion motors, but none designed for aircraft. And the Wright brothers owned a bike shop. They were kind of in the engineering tinkering world, but their buddy Charlie Taylor was the mechanic. And they said, "Hey Charlie, like, work with us here. We need an engine that can work but also be light." And he had to like basically re-engineer an engine that would actually work, because nothing for boats or for other vehicles would work. It was unsung, so that's one of the things I talk about. The Wright brothers, two pretty anonymous people out in this remote, far-flung place. There were big projects around powered flight at the time, funded by the Smithsonian and the War Department and all these things that were getting all the attention. There were people gathering, huge crowds, and there would be these big launches, and everybody would sort of talk about them. Most of them, all of them, colossal failures. Things weren't working. You can see the pictures of some of these things now, and it looks silly almost, but that was the conventional thought at the time of what was going to work. And then I use the word unimpressive, right? Like I mentioned, they're going slow. They're not very far off the ground. They went for a total, let's see, I wrote this down, 120 feet was the first powered flight. So, they got off the ground and flew, but barely off the ground and not that far. And it's very incremental. Like, that's a small thing. And yet that was the breaking point. We now have powered flight, and everything else, we know the rest of that story. And then the last thing I say about the Wright brothers is that the work was unfinished. Literally the same day. So they took multiple flights. You imagine it was very exciting to get this thing working. A gust of wind flipped the flyer over and broke it, and they couldn't fix it again. They had to take it back to Dayton, Ohio, and work on it over the off season and come back the next winter to fly again. So you look at that, like, on the one hand, it's like, oh, that was pretty cool. Like, we flew, there's a high five moment, but it's not like what you read in the history books. And then there was, airplanes and all these things. It's like, it was all just one person being an empowered learner, doing the habits and practices of learning, one person at a time. In fact, the next year was frustrating because I didn't talk about this in the book, but they realized, there's a lot of theory we're missing around the physics of flight. And they went and got all the conventional wisdom around flight and incorporated it, did all these calculations and redesigned their thing around kind of the latest math and physics and engineering, what was known at the time. And they went back and tried it again, and it didn't work at all. The latest and greatest didn't help them. And the year after that, they kind of threw that out and went back to this is what we learned through our experience. It's just a different way of learning. And it's easy for us, I think there's a lesson in that. It's easy for us to kind of defer to the experts. Later in the book, we talk about credentialism and some of these things that, it's comfortable to allow someone else to tell me what I know and what I don't know. The Wright brothers because they were so committed to this goal of getting off the ground, they were able to recognize when the time was to sort of reject that system and structure and take permission themselves to be like, well, no, I guess we're the leading experts. Not out of a place of vanity or anything. It's just, we can't trust anybody because we need to fly and no one can help us. So it's time to apply our own work. And Orville got into it too. They started doing lots of math themselves and working out the calculations and figuring out, okay, well, what's wrong with the way people were understanding it before?
Yeah, I love that. I think there's so much to be learned there about our own learning journey and how we help kids learn, right? When I look at how most kids learn, this idea of polish is really important. I was just actually in a micro school with my kids yesterday, and they were doing these presentations, and I'm like, man, that is unpolished, right? It's that is not the final version of their learning, right? But it is part of their journey. But we're so into looking at the final result and want to like show something off as shiny. And it's like, whoa, learning, real, like messy learning is more organic. It's not linear. We're just uncomfortable with that. So I'm kind of wondering, like, we've touched on this a little bit, but what stops us from learning as adults? A little bit of this credentialism idea and the stories maybe, but curious if you have other ideas on that. And then what stops kids from learning?
There's so many things. I think all of them have to do with narrative, right? So we talked about these limiting narratives, and I share some examples in the book of, people believing what adults in their life tell them around what they're good at and what they're not good at and what they're capable of and what they're not capable of. And if I could do one thing with a wave of a wand, it would be to get adults to stop telling kids what they're not capable of. It's never positive. It's never helping. And can we please just agree to quit doing that? But unfortunately, you hear it all the time. And probably many people listening to this are thinking, I remember a time where an adult tried to, and maybe they felt like they were protecting me somehow. But it's not, it's just not helpful. And those limitations kind of stick with us. Some of them come through culture. So we talk a little bit about, tell some stories of places where the culture itself, it's learning is something that hoity-toity people do or fancy people do, or that's not us. That's there's just cultural trends that get in the way of what it means to be a real learner. I think perfectionism is another one, right? And you get to this with the polish idea, Kaity, where it's just like, it doesn't have to be, like you can't compare your messy progress to somebody else's kind of final draft later. It's much more just stop comparing and look at the progress you're making one step at a time. I mean, you imagine if the Wright brothers had done that, right? It would be like, if they had somehow got a picture of a modern day like 747 that could fly against, they would have given up in frustration. It's like, oh, how could we ever do that? And instead they just said, well, this is what it does right now. Let's see if we can do a little better next time, and take those steps on the way to better outcomes and better learning.
Another great analogy I love here is just like the assembly line. If you take, for example, like a car being, or we could use an airplane. I don't know if they use assembly lines for airplanes though. So we'll stick with cars. So you compare like at the beginning of the assembly line, what it looks like to the end. It's like, man, I'm never going to get to be like that end, that Ferrari or whatever. But it's like everyone is just on this linear kind of path that you have to collect bits and pieces of things and grow slowly. And I'm just so curious about what it is in our human hearts and minds that makes us so uncomfortable with that, right?
I think there's a really interesting idea there, which is what's the end, right? So at the assembly line, I think part of why people don't like that metaphor for education is it implies that there's sort of a fixed output at the end that everybody should be. Like it's a Model T Ford black, right? Like that was the Henry Ford quote, is like, you can have any color as long as it's black. So that was the that's kind of the idea of kind of a fixed assembly line moving forward. I think what's missing for a lot of people, and this wasn't missing for the Wright brothers, is some picture, right? Some picture for them. And it should be tied to yourself, who you are, what's important to you, what are your gifts and strengths. And you get into these lofty questions like, what are you on this planet to do? People that have a good answer to that question, they have almost a superpower, because it motivates you and compels you forward through all the mess, all the adversity, all the iterations. You're willing to go out and learn these things because you see it all as part of building toward your eventual goal. And that goal, again, should be different. Like it shouldn't be the same for every person. I think we're doing a disservice to kids to tell them this is the right answer and this is what you should be. But we do it all the time. I mean, that's so much of how society works.
Yeah. So to adapt that assembly line, it's like you are sure an assembly line, but it's in a factory that only makes one thing, and it's a unique individual.
So it's, instead of mass production,
on your journey of becoming a super unique, passionate individual.
It's a craftsman thing. It's an artisanal work. Yeah.
Yeah. Bespoke. I love that. Yeah. I love that.
So recently I was in a micro school and a guide was sharing with me that this student just has no drive, no motivation to learn. Half the time he falls asleep and she's like, I don't know what else to do. And I was thinking about that and I was like, well, is there really anything that we as adults can do to force a child to learn? Which brings me to like what you addressed in the book is how, as an individual, do we even decide to learn, and how do we learn how to learn? Does the environment really matter? Does the adult really matter? Like, where does this come from? Which is really like what we're talking about.
So I think it's really important to be patient here. There's there's a lot of things working against us in kindling a fire. Just like if you're lighting an actual fire, there's the weather conditions, the humidity, the problems with the fuel, there's the density of the, air and things. So trying to get that all right, it's going to be different depending on different situation. So just recognizing that, like, this is going to take time. It's not something that you just sort of, I think lighting a fire today, we're just so used to, like, I grab the little lighter and I just push the button and there's fire, it's, that's not the way, it's not the way this works. So, I think there's kind of two answers to that question. One is just to talk about purpose. What do you want in your life? And I think if people are honest, even young people, there's a picture that they have, they might not be willing to tell you. And that kind of gets to the other one, which is really about, we talk about it in the chapter, Foundation of Trust. There's trust reasons why they don't want to even tell you. They might not even want to admit it to themselves. Like, most people have encountered some sort of turbulence and even trauma on the way to being a learner. So much of this stuff gets tied up in our identity, who we are. It feels dangerous. It feels unsafe. It's putting us outside of this kind of comfort that our brains are so wired to seek, right? And so it's easier, in the case of this kid who I don't know, but I do know, right? Like, I feel like in many ways I've been there. I've seen these kids. In the case of this kid, there may be a sense of, oh, I'm really interested in that, and I could imagine a successful, happy life where I could make money and provide for a family and accomplish what I want to accomplish, and learning, But I see that there's a road to get there, and I'm afraid of failing, messing up, looking stupid. So I won't even tell you what that goal is. I don't even want to talk about it. I had this happen with a kid in one of my early micro schools. He was, and continues to be, he's one of the most, like, charismatic, like, fun people. Like, everybody loves him. He's goofy and friendly, warm personality, but constantly, like, disrupting what anybody else is trying to do. Like, didn't want to learn, didn't want to stay on the program, just sort of like, almost like, okay, you're trying to derail this whole thing. Like, this is your challenge to what we're putting together. And we did this activity we do for all the Prenda kids called Future You. And you allow the children to make a representation of your future self. And this kid literally took some clay. He made himself sitting on an armchair with a soda in one hand and a remote control in the other. And he's like, that's future me. Like, that's going to be me as a 30-year-old. And I, looked at it. I'm like, excellent statue. I like the way you've made the hair color. I'm looking for, like, positive things. I'm like, your plan is to be like, this is who you want. This is how you'd represent, like, your adult self. Like, you want to just be sitting back, relaxing and watching TV. And he's like, yeah. And I'm sort of like, okay, cool. So, we had a little discussion about, like, well, who pays for the soda and who pays for the cable package and the television? Like, how do you put that life together? And it was, interesting, but he's a smart kid, and kind of pushed back on these things. And we ended up walking. I walked away from that, maybe frustrated, but just allowing it to be, because it didn't really, nothing changed. Nothing really got there. Later in that semester, this is months later, we got a chance to work some coding into the curriculum. I obviously love computer programming, and I wanted to help give kids an option to do that. This guy in particular took to computer programming and got excited about it. There was this conversation we had later where he literally looked at me and said, I think I'm going to get a PhD in computer science. And I'm just like, that's a very different picture of your future than what you told me before. Now, a PhD in computer science can still sit on the couch sometimes and watch TV. Like, that's fine. But, like, your identity of, like, who you're actually going to be one of them is bold and daring, and there's embedded in that all this work and risk and challenge and learning. And I wondered a lot about that. Like, why was it that he felt that way later? I think he needed to know that I had his back no matter what, that I'm not like sitting here evaluating his choices. He didn't need me to play this role of reinforcing negative or limiting narratives for him, right? Like, and I just refused to do that. The other thing was he needed some reps at learning, right? And he did that in the context of coding, started to take math more seriously and some of these other subjects that were ancillary to coding. Writing was still a challenge, and he didn't see the point in it and didn't really put a lot of effort at that time into writing. We had to kind of nudge him and cajole a little bit there, try to help him care about that as well. But putting this together really tied to some sort of picture of where he wanted to go. I would say those pictures are in there, even if they seem crazy, even if they're not founded in any real data. If you can just get to a point where a child will trust you with that and take them seriously and say, how can I help? I think you've done a lot to sort of move on the right track. And we talk in the Dare Greatly chapter about, you should always be climbing a mountain, like have a mountain in your mind of where you want to go. That doesn't mean it has to be the only mountain you climb in your whole life. It's totally fine and good, actually, when you collect more information to shift to a different mountain. It's like, so maybe he's working toward PhD in computer programming, but later realizes like, I'm really actually into design and some of those things. I can use some of my coding, but really I want to spend more time artistically, in the design world. And that would be great, right? Then you have a different mountain and you're climbing toward that mountain.
I'm hearing so many good things in there, and I'm hearing trust and connection is so important, right? So no matter what, even if I want to sit on a couch with a remote in my hand and a bag of potato chips, that someone still, still has this connection with me and still is on my side. And then also putting the ball in their court, but then also giving them opportunities, because I feel like there's some kids, just being in lots of mom groups and around a lot of kids in a lot of micro schools, there's kids that come out of the womb and they just know what their passions and their interests are. And, I have some of those kids, like my oldest, from the moment he started playing with toys, it was like trains or things that he can build, and then planes. It has been planes since he was 2 or 3, and it's still planes at 13. He's now in Civil Air Patrol. But we're able to give those opportunities to him that really fulfilled those passions that are already there. For some kids, they just may not know until you just keep presenting them things, keep presenting them with different activities and opportunities, and then maybe one day it'll just click. That's kind of what I got from that story. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, something that I remember, this is like early days Prenda. I was talking to one of our guides and we were talking about this purpose, like always focusing on purpose. And she said that one of her kids said that he wanted to be a hedgehog farmer. And she like chuckled internally, but then they used hedgehog farmer like as motivation for a whole year. And like they tied so much learning to that. And it's because she didn't like say that's silly to him. She just went with it. And if you just trust kids and listen to them and then like demonstrate time and time again that you take them seriously and that they are a powerful person in the world, like they start to take themselves seriously, and then you start to see this
question here.
So I love that.
Go ahead.
So I heard you say a few words.
I was just going to say that it's kind of building on that, but there's this fear in the back of our heads, right? As adults, it's like, okay, yeah, like be interested in hedgehogs or whatever, but like really, like you need to be a lawyer or a financial analyst or a doctor or something. Like we sort of have our preconceived, and I would invite adults to challenge that, right? So really challenge themselves. If you need help with this, I'd encourage you to read this book by Todd Rose. He's a former Harvard researcher, really thoughtful guy the book's called Dark Horse, and he just follows people around that have been really successful, all of them kind of making this deliberate choice to leave a track that was picked for them by someone else and instead choose a track that they picked. So that's tied to their purpose and who they are. And the stories are really phenomenal to just see, like, this can be done in lots of different ways. There's not a single right kind of person. I think everybody would agree with that. And so there shouldn't be a single right path for people, which, if we really look hard at it, we sort of do all cling to this idea that there's a single right path for people. And it's just, it's hurting us, it's limiting us.
Totally. So you frame the whole book around Prenda's core values. So there's 5 values, and we've touched on a little bit of them, but I just want to go through them in a kind of organized way so people can come away with some tangible thoughts that they can apply. So the first one is dare greatly. Can you just tell us what that means and like how that influences like your like perception of yourself or as a child?
Yeah, it's funny that it's first. This has been a constant debate. It's like all the values matter and they connect to each other in a nonlinear way. So in fact, one of our values talks about starting with heart. You would put that first as well. The reason I included it first in the book about empowering learners is this idea of purpose and motivation, right? So it's dare greatly means, to me, it means setting a big goal and then taking that seriously and putting the steps in to achieve it. So I give this metaphor of climbing a mountain. You choose the mountain and you start climbing. That simple. Right? Many of us kind of have the idea that, yeah, it would be great to have some sort of purpose or long-term hope or dream or plan for my life. Maybe I'll think about something. I probably won't write it down or get that serious about it. And I might sort of partition it off as just like a whimsical dream that I'll just keep there. I think it's really the action. It's that second step. So choose a mountain is an important and serious step. It really doesn't matter that much. I think you can get lost in sort of analysis like, oh no, like I'm 10. What if I want to be an anesthesiologist, but I might want to be like a political campaign manager? And it's like, those are both great. Like, which one do you want to pick for right now? And then do something about it. And it's so fun to shake kids out of this idea that you have to somehow wait for permission or wait for something to happen to you. Even down to like when I was a kid, I thought it'd be great to do journalism. And I got as far as researching what the good universities are for journalism and somehow came up with the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, Nebraska. Like that was where I was going to go to college and study journalism. I was 13, I'm just like, I like writing. I think that would be fun. And then I just kind of left it, right? It didn't occur to me that there's anything I could have done really to move up the mountain of journalism, where like now I look at it and it would have been so easy for me to participate in writing in a variety of factors. Even my writing assignments at school, I just didn't even connect the dots. It was a totally different thing than what I imagined writing to be in a kind of a journalistic setting. So it's really about kind of connecting them to me. It's, and I love the metaphor of the climbing mountains. It's like, there's where I want to get. It's a huge peak far, far away. It looks like in the distance, but I see the trailhead right in front of me. I see the trail steps ahead. I can take those steps. And if you don't know what those steps are, you go ask somebody and say, what would be like 3 things I could do today that would move me toward this goal that I have of accomplishing this. You can do this at age 5 or 10 or 15 or 25 or 50 or 75. I mean, anybody can do this. And I think it's really important to just dare greatly it comes from the Teddy Roosevelt quote. I imagine many people have heard this already, but he really makes this distinction of the arena. Yeah, you've got it up on your your thing. But if you haven't seen this quote, like check it out. And I love the distinction. Many of us live our whole lives kind of in the stands, sort of watching life or waiting for things to happen to us. And it's a relatively small number of people who will actually get in the arena, right? Participate in life. The reason we don't do it, all those reasons we talked about before, it's scary. Our brains are trying to protect us. Other people might tell us not to, even well-meaning people. Our culture might discourage it. But what I'm trying to do with the book is say, everybody can do this. Everybody should do this. The world would be better if everybody dared greatly. Room in the arena. Climb on in.
As you said, you could do this at any age, even in your 70s. I was thinking, well, that's probably really good for brain health too, because they say mixing things up, continually being curious, so daring greatly into your 80s and 90s, so it's going to help you live longer. at least
Absolutely.
according to my neuroscience. Okay, so our next core value is figure it out. So what is figure it out, and like what isn't it? And how, when I think of figure it out, like within my own self and how I can use that value, but then also how I view other people, because we don't want to use that as, oh, well, go figure it out.
Yeah. So as a learner, right, as an
empowered
learner, I'm going to not only have some destination I'm trying to get to, but I'm going to have hopefully some path, some steps that I can take to get there. I just gave one example of figure it out, which is to ask somebody, what are 3 steps I could do right now to get started on this path? But similarly, what about Google search? What about reading things? What about asking ChatGPT what I could do as a young person to move me toward this goal that I have? You'd be shocked. You'd find all kinds of interesting things. Watching YouTube, signing up for courses, doing different things. So much of it is action, right? So like I mentioned, for me as a aspiring journalist, I should have created my own publication. I should have printed it up and gave it to people and asked them for feedback. I should have honed that craft early. All of these things, just like the Wright brothers, are incremental and unsung. It's a slow road. It takes a long time. We'll look at the end result after 10,000 hours of doing this, but it's really about the day-to-day steps. Figure it out is really a way of being. It's a resourcefulness. It's this confidence and swagger that's like, I'm going to, I can solve this. I can accomplish this. So I don't understand it right now. I embrace that. I accept that. I'm fine with that. And I see that as motivation to go out and get whatever I need to be able to understand this and move to the next thing. And we talk about this a lot in the context of Prenda Micro Schools, because we build a lot of the core skills work around mastery. So here's, 8th grade reading or 8th grade math, and here's what that means to understand. And I understand this part, but I don't understand that part. And we want to help kids see the path in front of them and take ownership, be able to master one skill at a time as they build their overall proficiency in the topic, right? And so that's an example of day in and day out, figure it out.
Yeah, something that I love that you said when we were talking about the Wright brothers is that they were in the tinkering world, right? Like, I love that phrase, like, enter the tinkering world. Like, you live life as a tinkerer, you're figuring it out, right? So the next one is learning over comfort. We've touched on this a little bit, but just
anybody who's
one more
gone
time
on a hike knows, like,
learning over
it
comfort
just gets hard. It gets tiring. Like, even if you can find the trail, it's like, it's not easy to get up there. So it's this constant reminding yourself that despite all of these things working against you, like, this is what you choose, this is what you want, and that the work you're putting in right now will lead to growth in yourself. So growth mindset is heavily embedded in this. It's this desire, or it's this constant perspective of saying, yes, that's a setback, but that doesn't mean it doesn't mean anything about me or what I'm capable of. It doesn't challenge my narrative. In fact, the narrative is always, I'm going to accomplish this thing and I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to keep going. Basically, you should expect things to be challenging and hard. And you should expect times where it doesn't work out the way you want. I think I share some personal examples of this in the book where things were really hard and didn't happen exactly as I hoped they would. It would have been easy to say, I guess I'm not cut out for that, or I'm not capable of that. I mean, think of the expressions, right? Like, cut out, as if we're some sort of stamp, like, physical object. That's not what our brains are. That's not what we are as humans. And the truth is, as long as we don't quit, right? As long as you keep going, like, you are going to get there. And you can go out and get all the help you need one step at a time. And so just truly believing that, having that internally, permeate your whole self and being, is an incredibly powerful thing. Like, that's why the word empowered is there. Like, to be a real learner comes with this power that many people will live a whole life and never experience, what that truly looks like. But you know it when you see it. It's truly astonishing. It's exciting.
Like you said, our brains are always seeking safety. So learning can be really uncomfortable and feel unsafe. So we have to kind of stop and go, okay, I can do this. And what's amazing is it's kind of like with the mountain metaphors. When we get over, we can look back and go, oh, wow, I did that. And reflect on all the things that you have learned. So our next one is my absolute favorite core value. It's what gets me up every day. And I love being surrounded by people who live out this value. And that's why I love being at Prenda, is start with heart. Can you give us a little more insight into what start with heart means?
Really, it incorporates this insight that learning is not an individualistic thing. Like everything we've talked about so far, if I was living on an island by myself, I could set a goal. I could go like learn through experience. I could do, figure it out type activities, and I could expect that it was going to be hard and persevere. I mean, you can kind of do learning alone, but we're not alone. And we live in this connected world, and we're, built that way. And there's this core piece of us, which is other people, and it's critical to the whole thing. So if you think of learning now as collective, both what can I get from being around other people? Like it's much easier to figure it out if I can go ask somebody a question. It's easier to choose learning over comfort if somebody can help point out to me the progress I've made and reassure me when things are hard. But even beyond that, like I can now be that for other people, and there's this incredible power. So as we talk about this, brave new world, as technology advances, as information is so abundant and there's all these opportunities for learning and growth, you ask yourself, okay, well, what are humans truly capable of? And genuine human connection between two people. I watch, a talented learning guide kind of get down to eye level, be there with a child, and you can just see like trust and love and positive regard. That's now telling that child, like, this is a place where it's totally fine to make these mistakes and do these, take these steps toward learning. And I believe in you. You can do this. That's not something that you can get through like an article on a website, right? It needs to be communicated person to person through the eyes. And this is a huge reason why in the company and the way we've designed Prenda, we love the micro school concept. This one adult and 10 kids, and you get to know each of them really well. And there's this genuine human connection that allows for kids to be in a place where they're willing to do all the hard parts of learning, because it's messy and it's hard, and we need help with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last one's foundation of trust, and there's a little bit of overlap I'm hearing in start with heart.
Foundation is something you can completely control, right? So as I interact with other people, I can ask myself, am I seeing this person completely as a human being, right? And that sounds trivial. There's many, many times where you'll be interacting with someone, and if you're honest and reflective, you'll see that I'm perceiving them as a barrier, an obstacle, a nuisance, an annoyance. I mean, we do this even with our own children who we love, right? It's not easy at all to actually see the humanity in another all the time and to be there for them in a way that really honors what it means to be a human, right? We talk about infinite value and unlimited potential as this person right here is capable of, I said earlier, like kids that are capable of doing things as big as the first powered flight by the Wright brothers. Do you hear that? Think about your kids and say, no, like impossible. Like ask yourself, like, is that actually true? And that can be incredibly hard to get to that place where that's what we believe. Kids are so good at reading through all of our, tactics and mechanisms. Like they know the truth just implicitly, intuitively. And the truth is, how do we perceive them? So start with heart is what's true inside of us. Foundation of trust is a relational thing. It has to do with them believing that about us. So even if you have completely perfect positive regard for this person, they might not believe you, right? Maybe they had a teacher last year that really didn't believe in them and just hit them with negative all the time and treated them in a way that was very clear that they were not welcome or valued, or they didn't belong, or all these different things that can happen. So I've built this narrative. You now as the next adult in my learning journey, like I don't trust you. And every child is constantly on this loop of like, do I trust you? Do I trust you? Do I trust you? That they're looking to see if you're safe. So being explicit about that, recognizing that that's what's going on, not just with children, but in all of our interactions, as humans interact with each other, we're trying to decide, like, is this somebody that I can actually trust? And there's trust like they won't hurt me physically or they won't take all my money. And there's trust like I can tell them honestly what's going on and expect support and positive regard. And it's just something that the world needs more of generally. For learning to happen, I see it as foundational, and that's why we call it foundation of trust.
Yeah, I think that's so wonderful. And I was just reading something this morning that said the Surgeon General just announced like a warning about a new epidemic of loneliness. And he said it was just as dangerous as smoking every day to your health. And so I see what we're doing at Prenda and all of these values. It's really like getting ahead of that and having relationship-led learning be at the forefront of everything, because no matter what AI progresses to, and no matter how we use it as a tool, like it will never replace just that person that sees you and loves you. All right. So we're running out of time here, so let's wrap this up. It's been such a good conversation. So what do you hope people will come away with after reading A Fire to be Kindled?
To read it and decide to be an empowered learner. Like you probably are. The fact that you've picked this book up, the fact that you're interested in this kind of thing, you're already thinking in these ways. I hope it gives you tools and reinforcement and support in your quest to be the kind of learner that's pure power in the world, that can lead to, it says on the cover of the book, like a life of meaning, can move humanity forward. Like these are the kinds of things that I believe humans are capable of. And I want that for you, yourself, as the reader of the book. I hope also that you will see learning as a collective initiative, right? And that you will do this for other people. You will be a support and a resource. We have people stepping up every day in Prenda, and it's so inspiring to see, who say, I don't have maybe all the degrees, I don't have all the background, but I love kids. I believe in them at the level we're talking about here, and I'm capable of making a difference in their lives. And I hope you'll take that step, whatever that looks like for you, but step up and make a contribution with all the gifts that you've been given. We need more empowered learners in the world. I mean, this is something that I feel really strongly about. I think it can truly be the difference between, some of the more negative future scenarios that we talk about and real human thriving. This is it, right? If we can help each individual person and collectively together become empowered learners, we can build the world that all of us want to live in. So that's what I'm hoping for. And hopefully that's not too audacious, but if it is, sorry, like that's the mountain I'm climbing. So.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for writing the book. It truly is a movement of just how we view children, how we view education, how we view ourselves. And I think the best gift that we have been given is to be curious. So thank you so much for writing this book. And where
the book's on
can
Amazon
people
and
get
I think
book?
barnesandnoble.com. I mean, you can find it if you just Google Fire to be Kindled. I think we have a website up too at the Kindled page. So we'll put links on the recording here. Thank you.
Awesome.
It's been
Okay, well,
fun.
thanks for joining us for today's special live event. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Yeah. So share your favorite episodes of Kindled on social media and reach out to us with questions and comments or coaching by emailing us at podcast@prenda.com.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget to keep on kindling.